You're listening to the CXO Spotlight, the podcast where business leaders and changemakers from around the globe share bold ideas, real stories, and the strategies driving high-growth organizations. We dive deep into leadership, innovation, and measurable impact for agencies, businesses, and talent ready to spark real results. So today we are here with Henning Schwinum, Executive Director of the Fractional Leadership Alliance. Thank you for being on the show with us today, Henning.
Thank you for having me.
Now, could you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience, and also what led you to founding the Fractional Leadership Alliance? What was the problem that you're trying to solve here?
Yeah. Well, I guess you and your listeners, everybody knows that the term fractional is relatively new. It's been around maybe 7 or 8 years in the US and less in other countries and other parts of the world. So I didn't grow up thinking that I would lead an association around the fractional industry. Most of my career I spent in sales. I was a sales leader for different companies. I sold chemicals, software, services. And about 6 years ago, my goal was to become a fractional executive. I wanted to be a fractional VP of sales, fractional CRO, CSO. And I quickly discovered two things. I wasn't well connected enough. I didn't know enough founders, owners, CEOs, board members, investors, startup communities to find these roles easily. And then also, when I looked around for a matchmaker, for an agency who could help me find these roles, I couldn't find one. And so I pivoted and 6 years ago started a business called Vendax. We operate in the US and Canada, and we're a matchmaker for fractional sales leaders. So we bring those fractional sales leaders together with companies that have a need for this service. And so over the course of those 6 years now, I've met a ton of fractional executives. I've met a ton of business owners, organization owners, community owners, everyone in this fractional ecosystem. And we all develop these one-on-one relationships with each other, sometimes business, sometimes it was just from a relationship perspective, working together. And at some point early last year, a group of 10 of us realized that there was something missing. There was a lack of a strong voice for the fractional industry because all the companies in the space are all new. They're all small. No one is big enough to be able to claim that they're speaking for the industry as a whole. And so the 10 of us got together and said, let's form an industry association, the Fractional Leadership Alliance, to be able to develop this voice, to bring all of us together, all of the firms, all of the organization and companies that operate in this fractional executive ecosystem and speak with one voice.
So in that, I mean, fractional is a relatively new term, as you said, right?
Yes.
A lot of people kind of think that is it part-time or not? What does fractional really mean? Why is defining fractional leadership so important, do you think?
Well, it is important because people misunderstand and people mix it together with other things. And I wouldn't use the word fractional as a standalone. It really goes together as fractional executive. And that describes somebody in a leadership position, in an executive role, leading a major function in a company, in an organization, but doing it as a part-time contractor, not as a full-time employee. That's the definition of a fractional executive. And that's different from a lot of the other or forms of work that are out there, right? You don't find fractional executives on Fiverr because that's not the workplace where you would find them. It is not interim, even though it's closely aligned to interim. It is not a consultant. It is not an advisor because a fractional executive actually comes in and fills that leadership role, becomes the COO or the CRO or the CMO of the company, only in a capacity that is not full-time employed and that's not full-time, but rather part-time because the company does not need this function full-time. That is sort of one of the prerequisites that business owners, that CEOs need to think about. How much of this one particular executive function do you need, and can you fractionalize it?
So on that note, how would you think would be a great example, let's say a little bit of a case study,
Mm.
on how this is actually implemented by businesses? Is it mainly for startups, start to scale ups, SMBs, so small to medium sized businesses, or even larger companies? Does it apply to all of them in all industries?
So let's start with that last point. It's definitely something for every industry because it truly is industry agnostic, and you have fractional executives with experience coming from every vertical, from every industry segment. So it's definitely that. I don't really see fractional executives in Fortune 5,000 companies. There are a couple of reasons. The biggest one for me is that if you work in a Fortune 5,000 company, 80% of what you're being paid because you know how to get things done on the inside. You understand the inside dealings of the company. And that's not something that a fractional executive has or can even learn in the limited amount of time that they are typically on an assignment. So to me, that rules out Fortune 5,000 companies. There are a few other reasons. Most of them are probably too arrogant to turn to an outside help. If they hire help, they hire a nameplate consultant to come in because, if it's one of the top three or one of the top fives, what can possibly go wrong? And it's a safe bet. But back to who does employ fractional executives, I do think that the window of opportunity is different depending on the functions. My expertise is in sales, so our clients are typically anywhere from half a million to about $20 million in revenue. And in SaaS or tech, if you have $20 million in revenue, you probably have 10 or more salespeople, and that is a full-time leadership role at that point. It's no longer something that you can do on a fractional basis. On the other hand, though, if you have two or three reps, and that's the answer to your question. What's a use case? What's a typical example? It's a founder who started a business, who hired two or three reps, and now it's time to scale the business. And founders with a tech background are really good at the product, and they're also really good in front of customers. But most of them have never built a sales motion. They've never put together a process, the tools, and the team to execute it. And that's where you bring in a fractional sales leader. And that window is different. You probably wouldn't bring in a fractional CMO at $500,000, but they can probably stay beyond 20 million. A fractional CFO, for example, can probably handle a business that's 50 or 70 or maybe even 100 million in AR, and they still can do with a fractional CFO and don't need that function full time. So that window is different for depending on the function.
You give that's great examples. Number one, so I'm pretty sure that we all get a bit of a better idea of how it's implemented. Are there any specific industries or roles growing faster than others, do you believe currently?
Um, yes, so there is. I've been in this space now for 6 years. When I started in 2019, the granddaddy of fractionals was the fractional CFO because they had been around at that point the longest. Um, and because they've been around, there's less growth. I think the newest functions, fractional CMOs and fractional sales leaders, are the two of the major functions that are growing the fastest. Now you can break this down further and look, for example, at fractional CISOs or at fractional compliance officers. Um, those are functions that have fractionalized more recently, and there is probably more growth happening for them going forward. Because while it's at this point a really small portion of the companies that would consider bringing in a chief compliance officer on a fractional basis at a very early stage of the company, I think legal requirements and legal threats will make companies realize that they should be doing this much sooner. And so the market is continuously shifting. When we started 6 years ago, the only clientele that we had was in SaaS and in tech, because SaaS and tech is typically the part that embraces an organizational innovation like the fractional executive concept first. Um, Later come more traditional businesses, professional services or manufacturing, and they're still on the growth path. And so for us today, we have about a 50-50 split between SaaS and tech and the rest. And I believe that the rest will continue to grow, while SaaS and tech will still be there, but share-wise, it will continue to shrink on a percentage basis. And one of the reasons is that if you look across all companies, statistics tell us that only about 25% of all companies in the US at this point have embraced a fractional executive, have had a fractional executive in their ranks. So there's huge growth potential, not just between functions, but also with those 75% of companies that have not had a fractional executive yet. And that's in the US, which is considered sort of the leading market for fractionals. If you then go to other countries, including Australia and New Zealand, you end up with a smaller share and probably a few years of lag behind the US.
Yeah, that's usually what the case is. Whatever happens in the US usually has a trickle-on effect in a later timeline for ANZ, Australia, New Zealand. My question would be, you mentioned about 20% at the moment in the US. Do you think that that's going to change very quickly to a much higher percent, let's say because of full-scale global automation? By 2030, it's been estimated, and we're already in the full swing of it. Millions of jobs will be replaced by a flurry, a number of automations, including AI, robotics, you name it, and pretty much all along the lines of every aspect of a business. So all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. What are your thoughts about growth? Is it going to be a big shift when fractional becomes a major player in the global market?
I'm not certain I would align the growth of fractional with the growth of AI, or any technology for that matter, because technologies tend to grow at a much faster rate than human organizational concepts. Humans tend to be conservative. They tend to do things the way we've always done it, and so the key to the growth of the fractional executive movement is that we simply have to tell the story over and over again, how fractionalizing executive roles makes sense for companies. Because as they grow, you can bring in the right talent, right sized to your need, at a lower price point, much sooner than you would in any of the traditional organizational concepts. And if you think of the startup world, the traditional concept was, a founder, two executives, everybody does everything. You multitask yourself to death, and you do things that you're not really good at. You waste time through changes and having to switch roles, and that is it's a wasteful concept. And if you think this through and say, let me fractionalize these roles, and let me ask, how much do I need each of these functions? Then you can bring them in sooner. You have a better qualified executive or leadership team in your company, and you can change each component as the company develops. We are seeing shortening tenures in the startup world. So sales leaders, VP of sales, CROs at this point last anywhere from 12 to 18 months in a company. So you may as well think about this more as fractional, as temporary, until you've reached the next growth stage and need different talent. So the idea of hiring for potential, for development, for growth, for staying with the business over 10 years, I think that's an outdated and also wasteful concept. And I say this as someone who went through a startup experience for 11 years from 0 to 15 million, and learned my way through all of these stages, because I didn't come with the experience of what each of these growth stages requires. But I think we can do this differently now. But we have to tell the story. I don't think that a business owner, a founder, a CEO, a board member naturally recognizes this as an advantage. Because I think that especially board members, investors tend to be conservative. If you think of any VC or private equity group, they have the same concept that they apply to their portcos over and over and over again, because it has worked for them in the past. And so it's really hard to break in and say, think about something new. And we're going full circle now, because that's where a group like the FLA comes in, because an individual solopreneur who is a fractional has a really hard time telling that story. But an association can do that much better.
So on that note, let's look at both sides of the coin then. What should CEOs know before hiring a fractional leader?
Well, when they're in the process of looking for one, I would argue that the most important criteria to look for is past experience. To me, that means you look for somebody who's done exactly what you, the company, you, the founder, are now setting out to accomplish. So, if you're wanting to grow from 1 million to 5 million, if you're in fintech, if you're selling to small and medium-sized credit unions, if you're selling deal sizes of $20,000 a year in 3 to 5 year subscriptions, then you want somebody who checks all of these boxes, who has done all of these things before, because that is the one that can step in and can be immediately successful. You're not looking for development potential. That's not what you hire fractionals for. I would also argue that this omnious cultural fit is something that you should put a little bit on a back burner, not totally ignore it. If somebody doesn't feel like the right fit to you, the CEO, you shouldn't bring them in. But it doesn't need to be a situation where every employee in your organization interviews and has a vote, and you find somebody that is so mellow that they make friends with everybody. So that kind of cultural fit, I don't think should be in the foreground. It's past experience, and then think outside the box on how you can scope this role. What needs to be included? I mean, I spoke about what is happening, what was happening traditionally. The COO, who was also the head of HR, the office manager, and locked the building at night. You don't need that anymore. Think about that one role, put a framework around it. What do you want this role to accomplish? That will tell you how much of that resource you need, and then go find that person with the right experience.
That's great feedback for many CEOs. I can imagine for them to start thinking on a different level for different solutions. What advice would you have for professionals potentially going fractional?
Yeah. The interesting thing is, in 6 years, I've probably talked to 3,000 fractional executives by now, 500 a year, 2 a day, in sales and in many other functions. And many of them have been fractional for a while. Many of them are new and or contemplating to enter the fractional world. I think the one thing to be aware of is that what you're doing is you're building a business around yourself. You're the product that you're selling, and you're building a business because you're not just putting yourself out there. You market yourself, you sell yourself, you send an invoice for your services, you account for yourself. So you need to do all the things that a business does, and you're the product. And I've seen a lot of executives who are not good at that. who've never done this before. It's easier to sell, to market, to operate somebody else's products, somebody else's service, but now it's about you. And I think there are um, training partners out there by now, people who have gone through the experience themselves. And I would encourage every fractional or every executive who is considering to become a fractional to look out for one of those training providers and try to learn upfront, what it takes to be a great fractional executive, to build a successful business around yourself.
I absolutely love that. I totally agree. It's very similar to the agency world that I'm from. Worked for the biggest agencies and boutique agencies. Built my own agency with a couple of mates, two multi offices. We're all great at supposedly doing the work for our clients,
Yeah.
but when it comes to making a profile for yourself and making yourself look great, uh, a lot of agencies don't really know how to do that. So it goes both ways. I can totally agree with the professionals. So it's on that note, how can people then connect or join with the FLA, and what would the reason be for it?
Yeah. You can find us. Our website is fractionalleadershipalliance.com, one long word. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. There's only one Henning Schwinum on LinkedIn. So easy to find. And so you can get in touch with us and get in touch with me that way. We are open for new members. We embrace new members from around the world. And we're looking at this moment for organizations, for companies to join. Not so much for the solopreneur, or not yet. In our mission, we have decided that we're going to focus on those company members because they allow us to more quickly achieve a larger scale. An organization or a company like Fractionals United, or like Vendax, or like a directory, they represent 1,000 or 2,000 members that are all fractional executives. And so that way we can more quickly grow to become a voice for the industry and a voice in the industry. But eventually we'll open up to solopreneurs as well. So on our website, there is a form to express interest to join. And if you are a solopreneur, please do that. We'll put you on our mailing list. But we at this point will hold back on accepting you as a member, but that will come at some point in the future. And now, if you think of a business owner who runs a business that services, that helps fractional executives, why should you join? Because we are the only global industry association. We're not a community. There are plenty of other communities out there who do a phenomenal job of bringing executives together. We're not a directory. We're an industry association, and that means all our members are companies represented by their CEO or founder or managing director, and the topics that we're discussing are meaningful for all of us, and we're looking at the opportunity to grow the fractional executive industry around the world, and take a lot of different actions to facilitate that.
I love that, and that we'll put the information in the footnotes of the podcast as well. I gotta ask though, what do you see as the main challenges ahead, not only for fractional industry or for fractional as a whole, but also for all of the industries and companies that you're associated with?
Well, I mean, obviously the global economy faces a ton of challenges that none of us have control over. So the best thing we can do is listen, look, learn, adjust, and work within our strengths to make the best of it. But from a fractional industry perspective, there was, first of all, here's a question whether it is truly an industry yet. And the answer is a little different in different parts of the world. We think that in the US, it is at this point an industry. In other parts, it's a little too immature yet to be called an industry. But as we talked about earlier, it will catch up, and other countries will soon be able to call it an industry as well. And within that industry, I think it's important to share the successes, the positive examples, and as an industry association, that is in essence our role. Like most industry associations, as they become active on behalf of their members, on behalf of the industry, we need to put the positive examples into the foreground. We need to look out for threats. For example, a question you raised earlier around the definition of what is a fractional executive. I think that's an important definition we have to put out there so that business owners, CEOs, founders understand how a fractional executive is not a consultant, not an advisor, not a temp, not a part-time worker, but its own category. So we need to recognize those threats as an association, address them, and go public with that information and raise our voice where necessary.
I guess it's an educational question at the moment, making people aware, especially in the C-suites, of what fractional is, what's the difference between a fractional and a non-fractional, and how it can really affect their business. I have to ask though, what inspires you most this day and age?
um, Well, it's a great question. It's very personal. I worked at startups before, and I always thought of myself as somebody who can execute well, but who couldn't ideate. And that's until I came up with the idea for my matchmaking service for Fractional Executive, Vendux, and also ideated the idea around the FLA and bringing together a global group of companies. And I am psyched by what I'm seeing around me and how little by little the pieces fall into place to make this idea a standard around the world in every industry. No longer an outlier, no longer something for a small subset of either functions or industries or countries, but slowly but surely these pieces fall into place. And I want to continue to play a part in that. And that's what gets me up in the morning.
I absolutely loved it. So obviously you've had a really successful career, ups and downs, I'm sure, like everybody else, but with every mistake you make, I hope that you learn and you do better the next time. Going through your career though, was this what you envisioned when you were growing up, the career that you are on, you are on or in right now?
No, my growing up, I wanted to become a captain on a large ship and navigate the oceans. That was my dream. That was the job I was pursuing. It didn't come to play, and that's okay. I'm very happy with what I'm doing today, but it definitely wasn't my dream growing up.
So, not Captain Henning yet.
Well, I can captain a sailboat, but I was thinking more about a large ocean-going freighter or oil tanker or something of that sort.
Oh, I love it. Well, then I got to get you in contact with my brother because he does exactly that.
He
But
does that?
he'll have his own set of experiences there. Some
That's
bitter,
cool.
some
Maybe
sweet.
I'll hitch a ride with him one day.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, Henning, I think if there's any last notes or messages you'd like to give to our viewers, now would be absolutely the time to do so.
Well, I first of all appreciate the opportunity to be part of this show and for you to have me. I always love to talk about the fractional world. If you haven't guessed that by now, I love what we're doing at the FLA, and I hope that people, if you embrace it, great. If you have doubts, reach out and ask questions. Let me know. I'd love to jump on a call with you and answer any questions, any concerns that you have, and ideate with you how a fractional executive might fit into your organization, into your team.